feels quite appropriate that that last advert contained the line, share what you're struggling with, because that's really what this hour is all about. We are giving over the first hour of the show today to talk about something that is just not talked about enough. Men who have survived sexual abuse. You know, in the age of #MeToo, it is not only female voices which are reclaiming their stories, their right to acknowledge what happened to them, and their right to share those stories. Male voices are emerging as well. And we have one such survivor with us in studio today to explain why that act of speaking out is so important to him and to others. His name is Dale, and he reached out to me a while ago using the hashtag Let's Talk About It. And Dale is going to do just that, not only talk to us about his own story of abuse and the impact it had not just on his childhood but on his adulthood as well, but he also really wants to encourage other men to do the same. And I want to thank you first of all, Dale, for joining us today. It's wonderful to have you with us in studio.
Thanks, Pippa.
Also with us, a very warm welcome to Joan van Niekerk, a voice you have heard several times on the show over the years. Joan is a former director of Childline who still works as a consultant in child protection. Lovely to have you with us again, Joan.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
And then to David Ralphs, first time welcome to Cape Talk. David's the manager of the Cape Town branch of MatrixMen, which is an organisation all about supporting male survivors. It's great to have you joining the conversation.
Thank you, Pippa. Lovely to be here.
So we will chat to Joan and David for a bit of a broader picture and some perspective on some of the bigger issues within the conversation. But I want to start with the much more targeted focus of Dale's own story. Dale, introduce yourself to us. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dale the Whale Johnson. I'm 49. I'm male. I grew up in the southern suburbs of Johannesburg, and I now currently reside in Durban. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I take a pill every day to help me with my depression, but more importantly, I'm a thriving survivor of childhood sexual and emotional abuse.
Okay, welcome, David. How old were you when that abuse started?
The abuse started, my parents divorced probably when I was about 3. I was very young. And my mother had somebody move in with us a few years later. So I would say from about 5 years old.
Sure. Dale, I mean, do you have clear memories? How far back do your memories stretch?
Yeah, I remember the day he arrived, which is kind of ironic because I was very excited. I ran down the park because I saw this little red Fiat, which I knew that was him in it, and a big green removals van was following him. I can't remember the first time he touched me. I just remember being very young, whether I was in the bath, and he would come into the bath and, well, I don't know how graphic we're allowed to get here, but do his stuff. Whether I was sleeping at night, 2 o'clock in the morning, he would come into my room. Whether I was watching TV. I remember one incident. I was probably a bit older. I was probably about 11, 12. My mother had gone away to hospital for a nose operation, probably out of the home for 2 days. And I remember that night particularly being quite bad. So yeah, and that just went on till about the age of 14. At the age of 14, I think you realize that things are not what they're supposed to be. I was coming under a lot of pressure at school because I was an A student and I was being touted as being gay and a nerd, and I was coming under a lot of pressure, and I would leave school and go home and say to myself, but some of the things that people are saying are true. And I didn't have control over that until the age of 14 when I asked him. I said, he came into the TV room one day and he was in the nude, and I knew what was going to happen. And I just said, I don't want to do this anymore. Please don't touch me. For the last 10 years, it wasn't only the sexual abuse. It was, I wouldn't say physical abuse. I didn't have welts or black eyes or whatever the case may be, but I had, you know, if I did something wrong, I'd be hit through the face or on the head by him. He would use his belt, and in the time I think you looked at it as being discipline. I certainly didn't. So that's kind of what I was expecting to happen. And he persisted with, come on, one more time. And I just said no, and I held on to absolutely everything I could, whatever strength I could, and from wherever it came. And he finally left me alone. Unfortunately, that wasn't the last time He left me alone for a good few months. But I remember being 15 and him coming back into the room. And what I would do is I would just paste my belly, my stomach into the mattress of my bed so that he couldn't get to me. But he would try night after night, and I would just hold out. Until one day I was in the TV room and I was watching TV, and he came in and he didn't even ask. He just went straight for my private parts, and he did his stuff. And I kind of gave in. I thought, it's just going to carry on. Just do what you have to do. That was the last time he touched me.
What changed, Dale?
I think he realized I was older. He realized possibly, I'm reflecting now as an adult, that he realized the child Dale was over, that this guy was becoming a man, that the chances of him starting to talk out is possible. Like I mentioned earlier, it's the emotional abuse, the entrapment that goes with the sexual abuse that society is not even aware of. I know of a lot of people that will say, well, why didn't you tell somebody? Why didn't you reach out? And adults see children through adult eyes. And you've got to go and you've got to see that child as a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, sitting there respecting what's been told to me. Adults are correct. You'll be seen and not heard. So possibly that he knew that I had resisted him. Now I had said no, and I'd drawn a line in the sand. Unfortunately, it took him another 2 years to leave our home. And I was mentioning to Joan earlier on, when he left, I actually physically felt the bars coming off the windows of my home. Finally, in some way, it was my home. A home is supposed to be a safe haven. It's supposed to be a place where you can feel secure, where you're loved, and where you can really be protected against everything that's outside of those walls. That wasn't my home. But at the age of 17, for the first time, there was a release. And not only me, and a lot of people will ask about my mother, I'm sure. And I love my mother dearly, and I miss her to this day. She had a release. If I reflect now, I realize now the hold he had over that whole house. The bars weren't only coming off for me, they were coming off for her as well. We moved my hi-fi at the time into the lounge, and we'd put music on and we'd start dancing. We'd dance together, and Rick Astley's song "Never Gonna Give You Up" was out at the time, and that was our song. And we played it at her funeral. But so it wasn't. Yes, I suffered badly. I had the sexual abuse, the emotional abuse, but my mother suffered as well, and he was just a monster. I have no other word for it. He was just a monster.
Dale, I firstly have to just salute you for having the courage to share that story. I'm intrigued by what it is that has made you decide to do that. You're nearly 50 years old. You've lived with this and lived with the impact of it your whole life. What has made you decide that you want to share the story, and why?
Pippa, life for me is a journey. I don't feel I'm going to be 50.
None of us do.
Yeah. Oh, it's in less than a month. So, life is a journey. I'm 17 years sober on the 2nd of December. It's been a dismantling the pain and everything that's happened in my life. And I think, having worked and spoken a lot to Joan over my life, and she'll speak more about it, but we've had the whole activism. I realize that men are trash and all that, but behind every man is a childhood, and you're welcome to judge, but do you know the child that man was once? I'm not condoning the behavior of that person when they become an adult, but what I'm saying is, do we know the child? There's a lot of people, there's a lot of guys out there that for some reason have not been able to share their stories, haven't been able to have the recovery that I am so grateful that I have. I have the most amazing support group. I have the most amazing family, friends, work environment, customers, the most amazing girlfriend. It's just time for me to give back. If people say to me, tell us what recovery, what was me do? And I was once again speaking to Joan, and one of the things that would be so huge: be selfless. Be selfless. Don't make it all about you. Give back. Even, I'm not saying in the first bit. Every first bit you got to be selfish, like in the AA program, and work on yourself. But as you grow and as you recover, start giving back. Start giving back. It doesn't necessarily have to be with the abuse, but go do beach cleanups. Go collect money for a specific cause. Go run around for the SPCA in a dog suit. I've done that 4 times. And I think I'm just at that point where I have this recovery, and if I don't do something with it, well, then what is the recovery? Then it's a really selfish thing to have. And I really believe that my higher power has given me the strength of character, the personality to be this outspoken and to talk and to want to take it forward from here.
Well, I think a lot of people are listening and struggling to articulate how they're feeling listening to you. But one person who has put it on writing is Stephen, who sent a WhatsApp saying, gosh, listening to this, I am like, wow, I'm quoting, I take my hat off to this man. I can't relate, but well done to him for taking a stand. We often forget that men can be abused as well. And that's the crux, and particularly why I wanted to have this conversation before the 16 Days campaign starts next week, because there is going to be a lot of talk about women and children, as we know there has to be. But Joan, we cannot forget that this happens to boys as well as to girls. And in your time at Childline, and since then as you've continued to consult in the child protection space, they are sometimes overlooked. Do we have any stats on prevalence of abuse of boys in South Africa?
We do indeed. And what is very concerning is the neglect of boys. And I'm very concerned about the impact of just focusing on the empowerment of girls in this country. Research tells us that boys have a slightly higher level of abuse than girls.
Really?
Yeah. And the assumption is that it's just girls who get sexually abused, but we do have slightly higher numbers of boys in this country. For me, of great concern is the fact that so few boys come forward, and that we see very few boys in services. And one of the things we started to look at when I was still at Childline is how can we help our services become more male receptive, more boy receptive? How can we help boys feel more comfortable coming forward and talking about their abuse? What is also interesting about research is that of the boys who spoke about abuse in this research, and it was a properly stratified sample, so a lot of the findings can be generalized to the general population. Apart from the fact that so few boys spoke to anybody about the abuse, was the hidden abuse by women. Almost 50% of the boys in this study were abused by women. It's something we don't talk about because we kind of assume that women are nurturing, caring, and so it's very difficult for communities to see women as abusers. Yeah. And yes, they can be. And certainly when it comes to the sexual abuse of boys, we see a much larger proportion of women. The number of women who abuse girl children is, in fact, less than 1% in terms of what we know or what we think we know. Okay. Because we also have to ask ourselves, even with research like this, how free are children to talk about their childhood experiences? There is often a threat. Dale has talked about the emotional abuse, and part of that emotional abuse is keeping the child under your control. Putting the child in a position in which they feel they cannot speak out. Putting the child in a position in which they feel so powerless and so unable to either free themselves or speak out. and the fear of reprisal if they do speak out. And this concerns me from another perspective, and that is our criminal justice system is really trying to look at the issue of sexual abuse. But when the criminal justice system fails the child or fails to intervene to protect the child, often the child is in a more vulnerable position than before they spoke out. Oof. Because they then get punished for speaking out. And as you can hear, we often see boys who are the victims of physical abuse as well. I mean, this was how Dale was kept in that space, that kind of control, that management of his life, that physical abuse that he experienced.
Yeah. I mean, Dale, you've described very well the sense of your home not being a home. It is meant to be the place of safety that you can go to. You were struggling at school. You couldn't ever leave that behind you because when you got home, there was another form of struggle waiting for you. What was the impact on the way you lived your daily life?
Appearance and reality. My one gran called me Smiler. So you're so... you want everybody to believe that you're normal. I was probably a straight A student instead of 6, instead of 7. But it just started to take its toll. It was just too much. And I started drinking at the age of 14. I still remember my first drink being, I think it was vodka gin, and what do you use as a mix? I don't know, white wine. 2 of those, and I found my friend in alcohol, which opened up a release. But from then on, my marks went down. Now, I think it would be inexcusable in a school environment now to look at somebody that suffers so badly from peer pressure that they go from 6 A's instead of 6 and 7 to failing maths and science instead of 9 and 10, grade 11, 12 as they call it now. I remember being caught at school for drinking. And it was used to have the Friday night disco, and I got absolutely hammered. And I was caught. There was a girl I liked, and unfortunately her mother was my English school teacher. So she actually, I kind of, I was ratted out quite badly. And I was caught in, and I was brought into my HOD, which was actually my accounting teacher. The problem was that I got an A for accounting irrespective of what was going on with me. So, but if I look back, I was like, it was, all they wanted to know is how did I get the alcohol and who was I drinking with? There was no, what's happening with Dale? What is, we need to phone your parents. We've Dale lost you here. Yeah. You used to be 6, 7 A's. You used to be sort of, what happened? There was never that. I got my 6, once again, got my 6 jacks and get on with life.
We're also joined in studio by Joan van Niekerk, the former director of Childline, who still works as a consultant in the child protection space, and by David Ralphs of MatrixMen, who we'll chat to in just a minute. But I just want to share a few of the messages coming through, Dale. One email from Anonymous saying, all strength to your guest and well done to him for finding the strength to grow and recover. I'm now in my early 50s and have still not recovered from years of abuse at the hands of adults that I trusted. There is a stat that says it takes between 30 to 40 years before the memories hit you. And this is at the time when you're supposed to be in the prime of your life with a career and family. I've carried my memories in the forefront from my first suicide attempt in high school and have never recovered or moved on. This has impacted on every aspect of my life, but just sharing it helps. There's several of those messages coming through. Another one from somebody simply saying respect and thank you for articulating it for those of us who have struggled to do so. I mean, this is really what it's all about for you. It's not only about sharing your own story, Dale. This is what you are hoping to unlock.
Yeah, it's definitely. Yeah. I've seen that. I've never been anonymous about my alcoholism, and people have always approached me about that. And can you help this one and that? And this year I was very vocal or very transparent about suffering with depression. And then people start talking and they start messaging and they start identifying. And I've always seen, well, if I can do that with alcoholism, depression, then my main thing is my sexual abuse and the abuse of other children. We need to talk about it.
A lot of people are asking what became of your abuser, whether you ever had the chance to lay charges or to confront him.
No, like I said, he moved out kind of when I was 17 in my last year of school. I saw him once after that. I was at Sun City and he walked past and I just looked at him and he knew I was there but just made no eye contact. I was 21 when my mother let me know, I think I was overseas at the time, that he had shot himself. He had taken his life.
How did you feel in that moment? Because
numb.
Yeah.
I was numb. It's a place halfway between I wanted to shoot you, but I'm glad you're gone.
And I'm still here.
And I'm still here, but I was still nowhere near where I am today then. So I didn't feel any victory at that time because I was still very damaged.
Before we move to David, Joan, I just was chatting to you in the break and mentioned, I know listeners may have heard the interview with Costa Karastavrakis last week, who spoke about how incredibly empowering it was for him to go and lay a charge against his rapist 20 plus years after the attack, knowing full well that it wouldn't lead anywhere criminally, but the act of laying that charge was so important to him. Dale didn't have that opportunity. Circumstances kind of robbed him of it, but it is... Is it something that you think is worth pursuing, even if it is 30 years down the line with very little hope of a prosecution?
Absolutely, because it brings the behaviour out into the open. The offender is identified, and often that protects other children that offender is in contact with. Because so much of that behaviour is totally hidden away. And people assume that someone is safe until a child says, this happened to me. As you hear, Dale could not tell anybody whilst it was happening. That man moved on. And sometimes I often wonder where he moved on to. Was it to another single mother with vulnerable children? It's also significant that the abuse stopped when Dale was 15. And perhaps, although Dale had started to say no more, it stopped because Dale was no longer an important sexual interest for him.
He was too old.
Because he was, too old. He was growing up. And this is why it's so important. Offenders so often move from one child to the next. Bringing their identity out into the open is protective for others.
So important. Thank you. Well, there's a WhatsApp in just saying all abusers and paedophiles should be named on a list to prevent the abuse of other children, which is kind of what you've referenced there. Okay, David's been waiting very patiently to come in, and I've asked David to join us today because I think it's so important that we let people know that there is an organisation like MatrixMen which exists for this very purpose, David, of supporting men who have been through sexual abuse. Thank you so much for joining us today. Can you, before we talk further about the impact of abuse, just tell us a little bit about MatrixMen?
Sure. MatrixMen, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity. Sure. And also thanks to Dale for sharing that heart-wrenching story. And I think if I can just give a little bit of background, MatrixMen was started about 8 years ago. It was started by Martin Pelders, who is based in Johannesburg and who facilitates the Johannesburg groups of MatrixMen, of which I've been fortunate enough to participate over the last 3 or 4 years. In that time, the group has, it started out as a very small sort of core of men, and generally, interestingly, in their 40s. Mm-hmm. And it's roughly then the time that people, that men particularly, feel the need to address it. They feel the impact of the childhood sexual abuse on their lives, and that's when it comes to the fore. And so that small core group has grown, and today I think as a result of people becoming more vocal about what's happened to them, people sharing their vulnerabilities and encouraging others to do the same. But in addition to that, you've got legal landmarks where, for example, the Frankel 8 judgment changed people's lives. In the context of that group, that was cause for celebration because suddenly people, and what the Frankel judgment did was it called an end to that 20-year period of prescription. Yeah. And so now, essentially, was your abuser, Dale, to be alive, although it happened so many years ago, you would be able to press charges, to lay charges. And so things have changed, and the space is becoming much more visible. And so MatrixMen has grown, and it is gathering momentum. And it's interesting, I suppose. It's distressing in a way, but there are new people approaching MatrixMen on a weekly basis and joining the meetings on a weekly basis. So that core group, that small group that started 4 years ago, is now becoming of a far more considerable size. And in particular, I wanted to highlight to the Cape Town audience, I have a career which allows me to spend part of my time in Johannesburg and part of my time in Cape Town, and having benefited from the last 4 years of MatrixMen, which essentially provides a support. It's a support group. It's a fellowship group. It allows people to share your experiences, and essentially in this space where the legal framework has opened up, we are looking to be able to offer advice or some sort of direction in terms of opening cases in time to come against abusers. So getting back to my own situation, having been a member for the last 4 years and having the opportunity of being between Cape Town and Johannesburg, I've taken the step of opening a group in Cape Town, and the group is new. It's only been operating for the last 3 months. We meet fortnightly on a Monday night, and again, it's a small core group, but I certainly I'd like your audience to be aware, and certainly if people are feeling the need to participate or would like to participate, we look forward to welcoming them.
I think it's fantastic that, as you say, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. You don't want to celebrate the fact that a group is growing because you wish there was no need for a group.
Absolutely,
like this,
but I think the statistics speak for themselves, and the fact that the group is growing basically is just telling the story of what's going on.
One of the things I wanted to pick up with you in a bit of detail, David, was the impact on not just childhood but adult life as well, and on adult health. Dale's already described his battle with alcohol and his ongoing battle with depression. Those are common recurring themes in many survivors of trauma and abuse. They're not the only impacts, though, and I wanted to chat to you about the research that is looking into the long-term impact on lives. And specifically, we're talking about research that's actually been underway since the late 1990s already, tracking survivors of childhood abuse and neglect and looking at what becomes of them later in life, not just from a psychological perspective, but from their physical health as well. It's the so-called ACEs study. David, can you tell us just a little bit more about it?
Sure. Yeah. And it's something that's close to my heart. I came across the study just in the last couple of years, but it's something that I think has such has such relevance. And the study concerns essentially children who have suffered some sort of trauma during the course of their childhood, and it's a very simple sort of assessment or questionnaire. One of those elements is was the child exposed to sexual abuse in the course of their childhood? So that's one of the elements, and there are 10 elements in total, and some others might be having been exposed to general violence in the home, having witnessed their mother being the subject of violence. Coming from a divorced home is also part of the ACE studies. Parents being either alcohol or drug dependent, or growing up in an environment where there, for example, were lack of food or clean clothing or protection, that sort of thing, and depending on one's score, and it's sort of simply calculated, the impact on one's overall health outcomes over your lifetime are they really are astoundingly impacted, to the extent that if you look at it, and I'll just talk about the general sort of prevalence of ACEs in the population, the study revealed it was done by essentially conducted among 17,000 respondents, and 67% of those respondents had at least one ACE, and 13% of those respondents had 4 ACEs or more. And the study goes on to, it basically the toxic stress that one is exposed to as a child has an impact on one's nervous system, on one's cardiovascular system, one's immune system, and one's endocrine system, to the point that a high ACE score, or an ACE score of 4 or more, could have an impact on life expectancy of up to 20 years. Similarly, it increases significantly the risk, up to threefold, the risk of chronic disease, of heart disease, and of lung cancer. So it's something that if I could just reach out to survivors of sexual abuse, if for no other reason, I believe that, and this comes out of research and writing by somebody who's a very strong advocate for the ACEs and the ACE study, a woman by the name of Nadine Burke-Harris. And what she said is acknowledging the problem is basically you out of the starting blocks, you halfway there, and then addressing the problem sort of bit by bit, and the ACE scores can be addressed if you take it on,
it's
sort of head on.
To emphasize this, that it's shocking how big an impact they can have, and it rises exponentially as that ACE score goes up. But that's not saying that this is a predetermined, if you were exposed to this, you are going to be sick and unhealthy and depressed and dependent in adult life.
Not at all.
Yeah.
But there is, the studies say rather so kind of address it, be aware of it, and be aware of the long-term impacts.
Yeah. If you'd like, just for those who might want to read up more about the study, we're talking about ACEs, that stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. So it's ACE that you want to Google to find. And I've been listening to a couple of podcasts that have been looking at this in the past few weeks, and someone used the analogy of it being sort of like a network of railway lines, David, that your ACEs can set you on a particular line, but engaging with them and actively looking at them and dealing with them and looking at how they're impacting on you can help shift you onto a different part of the network, if I can put it that way.
Absolutely.
It's not a sort of a predestined thing, but it really is fascinating. It's a sort of a greater likelihood of being prone to risky behavior, of being prone to addiction, of being prone to depression, as well as the physical impacts that David's mentioned. And the good news, though, is that having had some positive childhood experiences can balance that out, and then the act of engaging with the negative can also shift that. So, David, have you seen survivor stories that have had this shift, that have been struggling and then gone through the process Dale is going through of deciding that I will not live with silence and shame, I'm going to talk about it, and what happens next?
Yeah, one of the expressions that comes up quite regularly in terms of the male survivor space is, the more I talk about this, the easier it gets. And having seen the core of the group in Johannesburg, who have now been together for the last 4 years, it's amazing to see how guys who came in who had real issue, who were facing real issues and possibly still face real issues in terms of their lives, isolating. Survivors tend to isolate themselves. They have difficulty in establishing and maintaining meaningful relationships, frequently sort of anger issues and that sort of thing. And 3 years into it, and this is not a short-term process. This is not, come to one meeting and, this is all going to get better. Yeah. You can be sure that the pressure will ease after the first couple of meetings, because sharing is going to make it that much easier. But the reality is, after a longer period of time, and I would say dedicate 3 years of your life to your healing as at a minimum. And it's amazing to see the weight lifting from guys who came into this process really, really weighed down.
That's incredible. Joan, you were nodding at a lot of what David was saying. Any follow-up comments from you?
Yes, the adverse childhood experiences studies are really very important, as David has been saying. One has to, though, not see them as this is my life script. And as David was saying, it's so important to engage with your history and try and deal with it. And one of the things I would like to say is, don't do it alone. I think it's important, once you've made the decision that you're actually going to deal with these issues, that you share your journey with those who are close to you. Because to try and walk that path on your own is very difficult. And this is where support groups are very important. But as David is saying, they meet maybe once every 2 weeks on a Monday evening. But life happens in between. And so you need a partner or a friend or someone that you can actually share with, who will just be there as a support for you, because the journey is a difficult one. Those memories, once they start coming back and being present in your conscious mind, can sometimes feel so overwhelming. So engage with it, deal with it. I agree with David that it takes time. Don't expect that attending a group for maybe 8 sessions is going to take away that pain. the challenges that this history presents you with. It's not going to happen like that. It's going to be an ongoing pathway. And some survivors of childhood abuse also find that it raises itself at certain times of their life. So maybe when you have a child who's the same age as you were when you were abused, or a grandchild same age as you were when you were abused, or just a fleeting passing of someone who maybe did abuse you in the street or at a shop or whatever can
trigger that response.
Trigger it again. And these are events that need to be talked about. I saw him today. This is how it felt. And I think sometimes this is more difficult for men than for women. Women are often much more comfortable talking about the difficult feelings. For men, so many of these difficult feelings are difficult to acknowledge. Acknowledging that you're a victim, when society puts on men that you have to be the strong person, the protector, certainly not the victim. So for men, this is more difficult.
I want to finish by, if I may, Dale, I want to share with the audience a portion of what you wrote to me in that initial email, because it is just so beautiful to hear and to read. Dale wrote the following: that I'm finally in a place where life is an absolute joy to live. I've fallen in love with myself, which sounds weird, I know, possibly even conceited, but having loathed myself for most of my life, it is a luxury I cherish. My heart soared reading those words, and that's what it's all about, isn't it, Dale? Today is about talking to other men listening to say it is possible to get there.
Yeah. If the child who was about 6, who was in his room banging his head against the wall, hitting himself from sheer frustration all those years ago, would have believed that I'd be here today talking as a victor as opposed to a victim, he would have, wow, this is just so empowering. This is this just makes all those low valleys really worthwhile. We're losing, but we can make some victories. We can have some victories, and I just want more people to start talking. It's happening. Let's not ignore it. Let's have the discussions. Let's have tough discussions. Let's not say, and no disrespect to women, their gender with women and that, but men are going through a hard time as well. And by ignoring the problem, we are not going to get anywhere closer to where women want their men to be.
I want to thank you again. It's been empowering not only to you, if you could see the messages streaming in, it has been empowering to a lot of people listening as well, Dale. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation. To you as well, Joan. And David, I'd love to leave some contact information for MatrixMen for those listeners who might want to reach out to you. How do they do that?
I've got that for you, and hopefully we can put it on your website. The website is matrixmen.org. We're on Facebook at MatrixMen, Twitter at MatrixMenZA, and the same on Instagram at MatrixMenZA.
Thank you, all three of you, for joining us today. It really, your input has been hugely valued. Thank you so much.